Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Crowd Church. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I'm one of your hosts for this evening's live stream. I'm joined by Sharon. Sharon, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. I'm glad you could join us.
And we're also going to be hearing from your lovely husband, Matt, in a minute, who's going to be sharing with us tonight.
Lovely husband.
Yeah, well, he's all right.
He's pretty good.
I mean, yeah. So tonight we're excited to be starting a brand new series. For anyone who's been with us a while, you'll know that we've been looking at Easter story the last few weeks. But tonight we're kicking off a brand new series and we're going to be talking about Jesus, the life of Jesus. And the theme is Jesus the Revolutionary. So it's all about how the Jesus that, maybe you've grown up learning about, or maybe you don't know very much about, like some of those misconceptions that we have, like who's the Jesus that we think we know, who's the real Jesus that the Bible tells us about. So I think it's going to be a good series, and it's going to be rolling for the best part of this year, we think. So stick with us for that. But Matt's going to be sharing the introduction tonight. So I think rather than me just guess what he's going to talk about anymore, I'll pass over to him and he can tell us a little bit more, and then we'll come back to Conversation Street afterwards, which is just a chance to kind of post your questions, and we'll, like, while he's talking, and we'll try and answer them and unpick them at the end. So be posting, be thinking while he's talking. Matt, over to you.
Well, hello, good evening, welcome. It's good to be with you guys, and we get to kick off a brand new teaching series tonight, all about Jesus the Revolutionary. And so I've been looking forward to this, actually, it's fair to say. It's going to be epic. So make sure you stick with us as we go through this series. But I'm going to start, I think, with a confession, if I may. We're in church. One of regret. You see, when I was at school, I used to walk the perimeter during break. Just doing laps around the school. And I'd sort of be with friends. And I remember we were chatting and we were coming around the corner and seeing this sort of guy sat there on his own. I didn't really know him, but I did know that he was a Christian. And so I absolutely tore into him. I made fun of everything about him, the way he dressed, the fact he didn't swear, the fact he never seemed to have any fun. I couldn't understand why anyone would choose that. You see, in my thinking, Jesus was a killjoy. He was like the fun police. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you're like me walking around my old school. You have a version of Jesus in your mind that maybe you can't sort of shift past. So what if the Jesus you think you know is not the Jesus who actually showed up? What if Jesus is way, way bigger than our notion of him? So there's a hymn. Some of you may know it's an old hymn called Gentle Jesus, Meek and Mild. It was actually written in 1742. And I get why the idea of this is appealing, because who doesn't want a gentle God, right? I definitely don't want a mean and angry God. But it can lead you to the idea of a God who's basically a cosmic therapist with a beard and sandals, someone who pats you on the head and says, there, it's all going to be fine. Now, of course, Jesus is gentle. He is kind. But somewhere along the way, we took those qualities and we built this sort of entire Jesus ecosystem out of them. We edited out everything else. We kept the bits that made us comfortable and sort of quietly deleted the rest. Now, we've been doing a bit of clearing at the house recently and came across an old children's Bible. Beautiful illustrations. You know the kind of thing that I mean, right? The one with white Jesus on the front, looking sort of like a friendly primary school teacher in a white tunic with a blue sash. Everything's in pastel colours and Jesus is smiling and it's calm and he's surrounded by lambs. And I think, well, maybe this is the Jesus that people are rejecting. And honestly, I wouldn't blame them, because that Jesus, I think, is way too small for the world we actually live in. And we do this to radical people, by the way, don't we? You take Martin Luther King, right? Now, most of us know the I Have a Dream speech. It's on posters, it's on mugs. But the same man said the evils of capitalism are as real as the evils of militarism or of racism. He called for radical redistribution of wealth. And in his lifetime, the FBI called him the most dangerous man in America. And now he's on a postage stamp. And we killed as a society the majority of his ideas and celebrated the bits which we liked. And then we used his sanitized words to resist the very changes he was actually demanding. And I just wonder if we've done exactly the same thing with Jesus in many ways. And the problem we have with cardboard Jesus is that, well, he can't actually do anything. He can't challenge you because that's not gentle. He can't disagree with your culture because, well, that's not meek. He can't say something that makes you deeply uncomfortable because that's not mild. And so you end up with a Jesus who agrees with everything you already believe, which is remarkably convenient, isn't it? Now, here's the thing, right? A Jesus who never disrupts you is a Jesus who can never transform you. So if that's the Jesus we've invented, what was the actual Jesus like? And how does he describe himself in his lifetime and in his ministry? Something we're going to get into in this series. But I want to start at Luke chapter 4, because Luke chapter 4 gives us this sort of front row seat right at the moment Jesus kicks off his ministry, sort of him announcing to the world what's going to happen. And let me tell you, it does not go well at all. So I'm going to take you to the synagogue in Jesus's hometown of Nazareth, okay? Now, maybe 400-ish people live there. Everyone knows everyone. It's warm. It's that kind of dry heat where the dust just hangs in the air and the stone walls hold the cool from the night before. And people are shuffling around on these carved benches and the kids are fidgeting and there's the low hum of neighbours sort of catching up before things all start. Now, these people have known Jesus his whole life. They've known his mum. They've bought furniture from his workshop. And some of them probably taught him to read in the very room in which they were sat. And it's at this moment Jesus announces himself to the world. And he chose to do it here in this sort of small stone building that is the centre of this really insignificant community. And the Bible tells us that he stands up to read. And he's handed the scroll of Isaiah, one of the Old Testament prophets. And it's a heavy thing. It's not like a Bible that we have now. It's sort of made from animal skin and these wooden sort of rollers. And he unrolls it to a prophecy about freedom. And he starts to read. And so if you've got your Bibles, turn to Luke chapter 4. We're going to read verses 18 and 19, where he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." And then he rolls up the scroll and he gives it back to the chap that handed it to him, and he sits down, which is a bit like this, I suppose, a posture of a teacher about to say something important. And so Jesus turns to the crowd after he sits down, leans forward, and he goes, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Now, I wonder if you can sort of feel the weight of that. He didn't say, "You know what, chaps, this is a really nice aspiration." He didn't say, "One day someone will do this." No, he said, "Today, right now, in this room, through me, this is not a sermon. This is a declaration, right? This is what's going on." And the word freedom in this passage that Jesus refers to in the original language basically means everything's sort of been reset. which is a great phrase. It kind of has the echoes of this sort of ancient Jubilee tradition where every 50 years all the debts were cancelled and all the slaves were freed and all the land was returned. It was like this huge sort of economic, social reset thing that was going on. So if you imagine someone walking into Parliament today, or the House of Representatives, or wherever you are in the world, and they sort of stand up and they announce to the whole world that all debt is cancelled. So for you, your student loans, your mortgages, your credit cards, all of them cancelled today, right now. And this is the scale of the disruption I think Jesus is announcing, except he was talking about stuff way more than money. He was talking about everything, right? Now, this ancient prophecy Jesus reads from goes on to speak of God's vengeance and payback. If you read it in Isaiah, it's got this whole thing about retribution in there. But Luke records that Jesus talked about the grace, but then left out all the stuff about vengeance. Now, whether Jesus made a deliberate choice to stop reading at that point, or whether Luke is just highlighting that this maybe is what mattered most, the message that comes back is the same. Jesus came leading with grace, not with payback, with freedom, and not with punishment. And that is, I read it and go, that's amazing. But for the audience at the time in this small stone synagogue, they were deeply troubled by this. They were very, very uncomfortable. They wanted a Messiah who would destroy their enemies. They would take them out, and and every form of injustice would have been had their retribution and the enemies would have suffered. They wanted a conquering Messiah, a God to intervene, someone to intervene in their fate, take control. And I think we still want that today, don't we, from Jesus? And Jesus offers them and us a Messiah who would free them. He would free all the oppressed. But Jesus is including, it turns out, the Romans, their enemy, in his decision to free people. He's not going to conquer them. He's going to free them. And then Jesus, when he's talking to these chaps, still sat there, does something really, really extraordinary. He brings up two old stories from the Old Testament. And the commonality in these two stories is that God bypasses Israel entirely and sent help to outsiders, to the foreigners, to their enemies. He reminded them of the stories of Elijah, where he was sent to a foreign widow, and Elisha, who was sent to heal a Syrian general. The Jesus they thought they knew is definitely the Jesus who is not showing up right now. And what happens is the room erupts and they surge towards Jesus and they grab a hold of him and they push him out and they push him to the edge of the cliff. So the people that were speaking well of him 30 minutes ago, his friends, his neighbors, the people he grew up with, now want to throw him off a cliff, literally throw him off a cliff. In their minds, he is worthy now of only one thing, being put to death. And then Luke, the way he puts it is just remarkable. It just says that Jesus walked right through them and went on his way. That's a pretty significant miracle, isn't it, right there? It's just one of those things, try and picture it in my head. He just walks on through. But why were they so angry, right? Why would they try and throw Jesus off a cliff? Because the bottom line is Jesus is not their perceived version of Messiah, because Jesus just told them that God's revolution wasn't exclusively for them. His revolution was for everyone. And a Jesus who is for everyone is deeply threatening to people who thought he was only for them. And so that alone, I think, pretty much obliterates and destroys the myth of cardboard Jesus. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, familiarity with Jesus is the problem. Of course it isn't. The crowd knew Jesus. They knew who he was. But I think there's a difference between deep familiarity and then closed familiarity, right? Deep familiarity keeps expecting him to surprise you. But closed familiarity sort of thinks you've finished knowing him. One draws you closer, the other one builds a wall. And any of us can drift from one to the other, I think, without really noticing as soon as we think we've got it all figured out. So what does it look like when you encounter this Jesus, the one who turns up with freedom in one hand and disruption in the other? Because I don't think the real Jesus is meek and mild, but I also don't think he's angry Jesus, harsh and wild. He's something far, far more interesting. I think he's a Jesus who is lovingly fierce. I think he is fierce against everything that holds you captive. And I think he's relentlessly tender towards you as well. It's a really interesting tension. A Jesus who loves you too much to leave you where you are and loves the world too much to leave it as it is. It's the same Jesus who provoked a riot in Nazareth, is the same Jesus who wept at a friend's grave and welcomed children onto his lap. He's not one or the other, he's both. Now, if you've experienced a version of Christianity that felt aggressive or controlling, that is not what I am talking about. The fierceness of Jesus is always aimed at what's hurting you, never at you. And that freedom that he announced, it's not abstract. It is very, very specific. It's free from the guilt you carry, sure. It's free from the story that you're not enough. But when Jesus read those verses in that dusty old synagogue, he meant all of it. Economic, social, spiritual freedom. And we've tended, I think, certainly in the modern church, to define it just as the spiritual bit because it brings spiritual freedom. It's a bit vague, isn't it? And it doesn't really demand anything from us. But I wonder if this is the sort of sanitization Jesus is warning us about in these verses. And Jesus delivers that freedom not through violence, but through sacrifice. And Christians still haven't really always followed that idea, have they? But Jesus did. He understood that violence may change circumstance, but sacrifice, well, that transforms life. That changes hearts. So it wasn't through a sword, but it was through a cross. And everything Jesus announces in that dusty synagogue in Nazareth, he delivers on the cross. And when he came back from the dead, he proved that freedom was real. Now, this is something we are definitely going to get into in the coming weeks. So the Jesus you think you know might not be the Jesus who actually showed up all those years ago. It might not be the same Jesus that comes now. The one who actually shows up, I think, is far more dangerous to your comfort, but far more devoted to your freedom than you ever imagined. So back to my opening confession, the one of regret. You remember the lad at school, the one that I sort of made fun of or ripped into for being a Christian? You know, if you'd have asked me at the time, was I a Christian? I probably would have said in some way, yes, I was a cultural Christian. I believed in God because I was born in England. Never really thought about it though. But I did know enough to know that following Jesus meant becoming boring, joyless, a killjoy. And why would I not swear? Why would I not have fun with my girlfriend? Why would I live this straight-laced, boring life? I thought he was the freak, but it turned out I was the one that was the fool. And a few years later, I came head to head with this idea that Jesus was a killjoy. I find myself sat in a church listening to a preacher, and I prayed, Jesus, you can have my life. Just don't ask me to give up the fun. I remember praying that prayer in church. Even then, when I was prepared to become a Christian, I still had this belief, this idea that Jesus was out to stop me having fun. And I continued to wrestle with this idea for about a year. And in that time, I discovered that I was the one who was not actually having fun. I was the one who was missing out on what abundant life was. Not the kid at school, it was me. And that's my regret and it's my shame, because the way I dealt with my own ignorance was to be aggressively mean to him. Because I could, because I was a stronger one, because I was with my friends and he was sat there alone. I had become the very thing that I personally despised, because I had become the bully. But you know what? Thank God for his mercy on me, because I found out that Jesus was nothing like the killjoy I invented. And that challenged everything for me. So the Jesus you think you know might not be the Jesus who actually shows up. And over the coming weeks, we're going to meet the one who did. We're going to watch him do things that do not make any sense. We're going to watch him, or we're going to listen to him say things that offended the wrong people. We're going to see him love the people everyone else gave up on. He picks fights with systems everybody else accepts. And he died in a way that nobody expected. And he comes back in a way that changes the entire trajectory of human history. If you've given up on Jesus because the version you were offered was too small, I get it, genuinely. But who wants a small God? I don't. Now, if you've never actually met this Jesus, not the idea of him, but actually met him, I think this series is a great place to start. And if you've already met him, if you're already a Christ follower, but you've lost the wonder and the awe, wonder if this is a good place to start again. So my challenge to you this week is to try one thing. Simply read Luke chapter 4, the verses that we went through, and just read that over and over again, just that one chapter, and ask yourself one simple question. Does this Jesus I'm reading about match the one I've been carrying around? It's a really great question. Anyway, that's it from me. Back to you, ladies.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. That was just a great introduction. I really enjoyed it. I think it was personally very challenging. I think even though some of us sat around this table have been Christians for a long time, it's actually a really interesting question to think about. Like, what do you actually think of when you think of Jesus? Like, who do you think of? How do you think of him? What do you think about him? And how much does that marry up to scripture, or just kind of your cultural conditioning?
Yeah.
What did you think, Sharon?
Well, earlier this afternoon, I was just looking through and just thinking, okay, what are the different types of Jesus that we can get into? So I've made a note of a few. So there's, I think Matt kind of mentioned a little bit as well. So there's like the therapeutic life coach Jesus, where we take the nice sayings to enhance our life, but kind of leave the rest of it. There's the political or cultural Jesus, where we take the bits where he aligns with our political views and then like kind of, assign him to our political party. There's nice Jesus, where we take away the hard teachings, but we just keep the nice, the ones that, make us feel good. There's the convenient saviour, where we like the forgiveness of sins bit, but we don't actually like the submitting to him as our king. What else? I was thinking again of like in different religions, where he might be seen as a prophet, but not the Son of God, where people might believe that he didn't really die on the cross, but it was, some sort of illusion. Yeah, so many different types. Yeah. But also I relate to the people who had their expectations turned upside down and didn't really get it. Because I'm like, the amount of times where I've been like that, where I've not really got it.
I loved what Matt had to say about that whole thing of like, you can't really put Jesus in a box. Like, he isn't one thing. Like, he's both fierce and loving. Like, he's fiercely loving, and the two things are sort of in tension. And you see that time and again, don't you, when you get to know Jesus, that idea that he's both like forgiving, but also he has this strong thing of justice, and he doesn't let, you know, evil go unpunished. And like there's all through the Bible, there's all these tensions about the character of Jesus. He's not one thing, but these kind of tensions make him this incredibly dynamic character that's quite countercultural. And yeah, I think, you know, Matt's talk tonight really summed it up well. And you see in culture at the moment, don't you, and in the news, you see it played out all the time, this idea of like when somebody does kind of make Jesus smaller or make them fit their own ideology or politics, that can get you into all kinds of horrible mess. Like you see it in Christian nationalism and a lot of what's happening in America at the moment. Yeah. And it kind of is used as a justification to start wars on other nations. And yet Jesus doesn't take sides. He doesn't side with our nation. And like, yeah, there's so much we can get into, but it's just so challenging, isn't it, personally, to be like, who do I think Jesus is? And I think that's a really good question to sit with this week and kind of start picking like at home as well.
Yeah, I sometimes find that I feel like my brain is so small that I can only really grasp bits of who God is at any one time. Like trying to hold the whole thing together can be a bit of a challenge because God is so big. Like you say, you've got the completely loving but also the God of justice, and God manages to hold those things in tension. But sometimes it's difficult, I think, to keep all of God. I think the times when I feel like I'm more able to do that is when I just have like a really powerful experience of his presence, and then it seems like that it's easier just to hold all of those things in tension then. Yeah. But yeah, other times that can be quite tricky.
Yeah, that's interesting. I liked as well that whole idea of what he was saying about we can make this kind of cardboard cutout Jesus, which is just like usually just like a nice guy. He's nice. And like, I'm not saying Jesus wasn't nice, but he was so much more than that, wasn't he? And I think when we have that idea of nice Jesus, he's not that disruptive Jesus who turns systems and things upside down and really challenges your life. And like that quote that Matt said, like a Jesus who never disrupts you can never transform you. And I think that is something I will take away and ponder this week, because I think, I don't want, like he said, I don't want a God that's so small that he doesn't disrupt or transform or change my life. Like, what's the point in a religion or a faith that anything really? What's the point of doing it if it doesn't make your life different, better, transformed? Like, that's what we're here for, transformation, not just something that makes, that's just nice, comfortable.
I was going to ask both of you whether you've got examples of when God has like not slapped you in the face, that's the wrong phrase because it doesn't, but do you know what I mean, when you've had this
got examples of when you slapped me in the face.
maybe you slapped Matt in the face.
They were accidents, all of them, but anyway. So I was just
in fact, I've got an eyewitness tonight.
I'm going to have to explain this one now, okay, just so you know that I'm not a husband beater. So there was an example of, we were all in the hall, me, Matt, our daughter Zoe, and we were going to say goodbye, and I had this heavy bag on my shoulder and it slipped off. So I went to pull my arm, pull it back on. In the process, my arm flipped up and smacked Matt in the face. It really was an accident. But anyway, back to my question. So,
hang on, hands up who believes, Sharon, that this was an accident. Yeah, no one's putting their hands up in the room.
Come on, guys. Anyway, so my question is, have you got examples in your own life of where you've kind of been confronted by God in a way that you weren't really expecting or maybe didn't even necessarily like?
Yeah, I think many. I remember one time I was really not happy with life in church. Church was really frustrating me at the time. And I was getting more and more heated about this, more and more angry, more and more annoyed. And it sort of was going around in my head, that sort of emotion. And I was, and I think I was probably giving into it quite a bit. And I just remember praying one day, just going, God, I am really not happy. because you know that I'm a big believer in you can express and vent to God and your emotions. But I think every now and again, God just, most of the time I think it's fine. But I think there are some times where God just challenged, and I just felt God challenged me at this point and say, oh, okay, what is it you are not happy about? And I'm like, well, I'm not happy about this, this, and this. And I just felt God at this point say, you know what, Matt, I can listen to you all day long, but you go ahead and find me chapter and verse in the Bible where church is about you and what you get out of it versus what you give to it. He said, I'm all ears. And I was like, oh, okay. I just remember having this sort of internal argument with God, and I was deeply challenged that I had this really lousy attitude. Yeah, and as they used to say in North Carolina, that he got on me like a chicken on a bug, and that's what I felt at that point.
Yeah.
What about you, Anna?
I think one of the things that has really changed in how I think about Jesus is not thinking he's there to kind of bless me and make my life better. Like, I think for a long time I thought about Jesus as kind of this, person I pray to, and he's kind of like there to kind of make my life enhancement thing, like a little bit like the therapist, really, but more like sharing gifts from heaven on me, and like, oh Lord, I want this meeting to go well at work. Oh Lord, I want like a slightly nicer car. Oh look, like whatever it was that day, and actually realizing that the main point of relationship with Jesus is not about just enhancing or making my life more comfortable. And I think that is a trap that you can really get into, like if you spend any time around certain Christian circles, and it's just really not that healthy. There's a few good comments actually that have come through on the feed that I'll pull out as well. So Alicia said, I learned to see Jesus as a revolutionary from my dad and a comforter from my mum, which I think reflects their personalities and life experiences more than anything else, really. And I think that's a really great point, Alicia. Like the idea that quite often we make Jesus in our own image, or like to suit our own personalities. So, maybe it's human nature, but we tend to lean into the parts of Jesus' character that like resonate with us and who we are and how we're wired a lot, don't we, I think?
I think that can be both a positive and a negative, in terms of, I think we can see different parts of God's character modelled in different people and the strengths that they've got. Do you know what I mean? So I think some people do model that, like the fatherliness or the love. Other people might model the challenge. And together as a body, we get more of a whole picture of who God is through his, because he talks about us being the church being his body, doesn't he? So,
he does. Yeah.
So I think it can work both ways a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's why it's so important to kind of be in some kind of relationship and friendship with other believers, like, because you're not going to get the whole picture on your own, are you? Yeah. And I think that's maybe where you could just skew off on a bit of a tangent. Yeah. But if you've got other people that kind of lean into other elements of Jesus more, then maybe it brings some of that balance and challenge.
And I think that challenge from God can come through other people. I think one of the times that I first remember that, like, oh, I'm not sure about this, was it was when I first came up to Liverpool to do this discipleship year team, and I was a real mess. My mind was a mess. Everything's a mess. And somebody...
Hasten to add, she'd not met me at this point. I just want to point that out.
Well, we had met, but,
Well, from a distance,
Yeah. You're just saying it wasn't to do with you, Matt.
Yeah, I just want to be really clear.
It's nothing to do, not your fault.
Because it's obviously important for my ego that I'm not associated with your life being a mess.
So anyway, I was struggling, but one of the leaders of the team really challenged me that I needed to repent of stuff and I needed to forgive people. And it doesn't sound like much now, but at the time I was just like, what? How can you tell me that I need to deal with this? It's their fault that I'm like this. And I had this real reaction to it. I was angry because I didn't want to be confronted about my own sin or the people that I needed to forgive. I didn't want to forgive because I'm like, if I do that, I'm going to have to take responsibility for the way I am. And I didn't want to do that. So it was this, like, it just felt like God in my face, and it came through another person. But I think I recognised that what they were saying was true, but I didn't like it. And I think that God does do that with us. And I think like years before that, when I would try and get close to God, feel like my mind was going completely crazy, and I'll get angry with God, be like, why are you making this hard for me? But actually it was God revealing the stuff in my life that needed to change. But I didn't want that. I just wanted the nice cuddly Jesus who would soothe me and make everything better. But actually it was like, no, there was stuff that you need to deal with in your life.
And that sort of goes back to that point that Matt was making about Jesus is both fierce as well as loving and kind. And it's like actually his loving kindness that makes him fiercely pursue you. And, you know, kind of push you into a corner sometimes, like to know you need to deal with this stuff in your life. It's holding you back. You need freedom. You need healing. And, you know, the path of least resistance doesn't always take you to that point, does it?
So we do like our comfort, don't we?
We do.
And I guess I just want to give that as an encouragement to anyone out there watching, that if you are trying to get close to God and actually life is becoming more difficult, lean into it. Like, find out what is God revealing in your life that needs to change. And it might be that actually life gets more uncomfortable for a while, while God's dealing with that, while you're having to process that stuff with him. But keep leaning in, I'd say.
There's some really nice comments here on the feed as well coming through. So Zoe said, I've only just started to learn about Jesus recently, and I've been surprised about how fierce he can be. I thought he was just quiet and calm. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because that is that perception, Matt, that you were talking about. I think that's quite interesting. And Alicia said, I love that the Lord can embody all these contrasts because it helps me embrace coming to him on very different levels. And I think that's a really good point as well. You know, Jesus is such a multifaceted individual. There's been no one else like him, and I think there's so many different elements of his character. You can't just say he's like one thing, and that's why we're going to be unpacking this for most of the year, isn't it?
There's a lot to unpack. There is a lot to unpack, and I think it's really, I think in some respects that's the beauty of it, because you've got Jesus, who is God, who's created the universe, who is this awesome being who existed time and exists outside of time, and you know is awesome and cosmic and all powerful and omnipresent and omniscient and all these big fancy words we use, and at the same time he's the same God who knows about the sparrows and the lilies in the field, right? And you're like, this is a massive contrast. And I think when you need comfort, he's the comforter. Right? When you need picking up, he picks you up. I think when you need challenge, he challenges you. When you need that sense of security, that's what he brings. He's incredible. He brings you what you need, not always what you want, right? But certainly what you need. And I think this is this really cool sort of juxtaposition of faith, isn't it? I think the danger with that, and we are going to be unpacking some of these things like we've mentioned, is you just get connected to the one bit you like, right? Like Jesus is a healer, and I've seen Jesus do miraculous healings with people, cancers and all kinds of stuff, and it's brilliant and it's awesome. And so I just wanted to latch onto that for a long time, do you know what I mean? But it's not a complete story. And so you kind of have to sort of understand the breadth and width of Jesus in so many ways. And it's remarkable. That
comes with time, doesn't it? Like,
it does.
you're not. I feel like you go through different seasons of life, and there's like maybe different aspects of Jesus' character that you get to know. I guess it's a little bit like any relationship. Like, I think there's seasons of life where, you lean more into one thing, like you say, like healing, or I'm really learning a lot about how Jesus is the healer at the moment. And then you might go through a season of life where you really don't see any of Jesus' healing in your life or anyone else's that you pray for or that you meet. And then like maybe he's highlighting something else a little bit more. And I kind of think it's a bit like any relationship, isn't it? Really, like, you know, when you and Sharon first met, you we're getting to know deeper and deeper layers of who each other are, and you're probably still, learning now, like decades into marriage, like there's new layers and new aspects of each other, or parts of each other that are untapped and you don't fully know yet. And I think that's the beauty of a relationship, rather than it just being a faith or a religion. It's a relationship, so you're always learning more.
Yeah, no, that's totally right. I think the other thing the thing that I've noticed a lot, and I mentioned it in the talk slightly, and again, it'll be interesting to see where this goes over the next few weeks. One of the things that I've noticed is the phrase "God is love." It's in the Bible, right? We know that Jesus is the very definition of love, but in our heads, that's love how we understand it, right? And which is why I like the word fierce, because I think love is fierce. It's very, very fierce. You try taking a baby off a mother, and you'll see how fierce that love can be, right? But I think using phrases like God is love is obviously biblical, but I think if you stop there, you fall into this trap that I sort of mentioned right at the start, is that Jesus, because he loves me, agrees with everything that I feel, that I want to do, that I want to believe. And he can't disrupt that. He can't challenge that, because then it stops being loving. It starts being controlling. And I think I've seen Christians the other way who are all law. You hold the pickets up outside abortion clinics and all that sort of stuff. And you're just like, and it's all condemnation. And it's all, and you're just like, neither is correct on its own. Do you know what I mean? And I think that the thing that I really wanted to bring out today, that we really need to challenge, is this Jesus, meek and mild, who just accepts everything about my life, who accepts everything about my lifestyle, how I view culture, how I speak, how I behave, how I feel, how I live. That is not the Jesus of the New Testament. The Jesus of the New Testament is fiercely loving towards you, but at the same time, fiercely challenging over things which he perceives to be not the best for you. Right, where you're not living in a way that is going to bring the fruit of the Holy Spirit into your life. And the Apostle Paul puts it this way. Excuse me. He talks about how our desire is to walk lives pleasing to him, walking worthy of the call of God on our lives. And so I think there's this real interesting. We've talked about it before, the sort of challenge between grace and truth, between mercy and between justice, and sort of these tensions that God seems to be able to walk and unpack. But I think there is a danger in Western Christianity, which is Jesus loves me, therefore Jesus accepts me, therefore Jesus agrees with me, which I think is probably slightly dangerous theology.
Yeah, I do think within culture generally, but also within the church, there is less acceptance of people challenging you on anything. That what you've just said about you can't challenge me because that's not loving, whereas the Bible defines what love is and talks about that if you see your brother in sin, the loving thing to do is to go and confront them about that. But speaking the truth in love. So again, it's having those two things together, not just truth, not just wishy-washy love, but together, just to go, hang on, the way you're walking now is leading to death. You need to turn back. Come on, turn back. Yeah. And I do see a lot more resistance to that.
It's interesting, isn't it? There's another good point that's come through here on the feed, and it says, it's a fascinating point, the idea that Jesus transforms through challenge. Maybe it attracts resistance because so many of us have come to attach negatives to words like challenge. Yeah. And I think that's a really great point. And I think that's the key, isn't it? It's like, why does Jesus challenge us? Why are some of his teachings challenging? And what is the fruit of that? Because I think if you know that at core, God is love and he's for you and he wants the very best for your life, then actually you understand that his challenge, his discipline, his correction of some things in your life is actually only to bring you greater wholeness, freedom, healing, good things. So it's about trusting God's character, isn't it? In order to kind of be open to that challenge. Like challenge isn't a bad thing when it's challenge. It's not like challenge from a mean, evil parent. It's challenge from a loving father who wants the best for you and wants you to live the fullest possible life. And I think, again, it's like having that understanding, that right understanding of God is key to being open to it, really.
Yeah.
And I think that does really challenge the culture that we have here in the West at the minute, which is very much you make your own truth, you decide what's right. And so if anyone challenges you, they're not just challenging what you believe, they're challenging you as a person. Whereas I don't think the Bible sees it like that. I think it would separate those out. So it's just very much a culture clash on that at the moment.
It is. And it's, again, we're going to get into it a lot more, I think. But fundamentally, I think we have to be open to the idea that Jesus will challenge us. Because if he can't challenge us, if he can't disrupt us, like I said, he can't transform us. And I think about the guys in the synagogue that tried to throw him off a cliff. I mean, that's not going well. I mean, you might not stay on YouTube much longer, but you're not going to come here, hopefully, and try and throw me off a cliff if you don't like what I've said. But it's one of those where I kind of think they had this expectation, this perception of Jesus to act and do and be a certain way. And when Jesus didn't fit that mold, they tried to throw him off a cliff. And it's that idea that we're going to have certain ideas and certain notions about Christ that we have to be willing to go, God, if you need to challenge that in me, go for it, right? I'm happy to be challenged, not just because these guys from a studio in England have said it, but because your word says it, because I've understood something about you. I think that's going to be a really critical thing coming up over the weeks. Are you looking at the comments?
I'm looking at a few comments. Yeah, we've got Ellis has put, yes, I've seen multiple people misunderstand and mischaracterize what love is. I'm sure I do it too. Yeah.
Sure we all do.
Yeah, I think it's like having the humility, isn't it, to go, this is what my current understanding, but God, teach me. And he's also put, even when I pray for things I know, not my will, but your will be done, because at the eve of the day, nowhere does the Bible say, I'll give you exactly what you want. But sometimes it can be hard to accept, absolutely. I'm with you on that one. Yeah.
It'd be a lot easier maybe if he did.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Maybe. What else have we got going on in the comments?
Sonia has, I think this is a reply to Ellis. That's true, Ellis. I try to view it as we have done. Hang on. I try to view it as we don't have the full picture that God has for us, but it doesn't always make it easier to accept. Yeah, can totally relate to these comments.
Yeah, that whole thing of not my will, but your will is just a really hard pill to swallow sometimes, isn't it?
Well, it has this presupposition, doesn't it? That my will and your will aren't always going to be the same thing.
Yeah.
Which comes back to our point, right? That for Jesus to transform you, sometimes he has to disrupt you. And submission and obedience, the things that we don't really like to talk about in Christianity, it's like that is saying, I this is not about me, this is about you, which means there has to be a difference in those two things, right? And so everything you see, that you read, that God's ways are higher than our ways, his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. That's okay. Right. And that's the joy of it, I think. It's when you get into this place of, yeah, I've nailed this. God just, totally accepts everything I'm doing, me and God. And I just think that's dangerous thinking in many ways. But saying that, we're talking on Alpha the other night. By the way, love Alpha. We're going to start a new Alpha in a couple of weeks. If you're interested about the Christian faith, want to come join us in Alpha, go to crowd.church, the website, www.crowd.church. Just fill out the little registration form for Alpha on the website, and we'll get you on the course in a couple of weeks. But we were talking about on Alpha, obviously, there are some people who are very new to the Christian faith, some people who aren't Christians yet, and they have some really interesting ideas about Jesus. And they don't necessarily always marry up to the ideas and thoughts that I have. But it's not my job on Alpha to convince them to think the way that I think, right? Or to see Jesus the way that I see him. Because I've been walking with Christ for 30 years. This is something that has happened over a period of time, right? And I've been transformed, I think, by my walk with him. And so it's not like you need to get there tomorrow. Like, you know, this is back to your point, Anna, about relationships. You get to know people. But I think it's a daily challenge to say, not my will, but your will be done. 30 years later, it's still a challenge, right?
Yeah. And that prayer was originally prayed by Jesus, wasn't it, in the garden just before he was going to get crucified. And it was like he knew he was going to be crucified, and he was saying, God, this is not what I want, but if this is what you want, then I will do it.
And isn't it reassuring, though, to know that even Jesus, who was God in human form, also struggled with some of this stuff, like as a human being? Like, I find it really reassuring. Like, of course we're going to struggle with this. Even Jesus found it hard to submit to God's will when it was painful in his life, but he chose to do it anyway because he knew there was a greater good that followed out of it. And but it's not easy.
No.
So I think it's like following God's way is not always the easiest, most comfortable way, is it? But I wanted to contrast that with something you said, because at the beginning of the talk, you were talking about how your view of Christianity was that it wasn't fun.
Yeah.
That God wasn't fun.
Jesus, a fun police. Yeah.
So obviously you've changed your mind now. So what's your view on that?
Oh, it's radical fun. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't do this if it was. I say I wouldn't do this if it wasn't fun. I don't know if that's true, but I positively enjoy everything about my. I positively enjoy most things about my walk with God. I must clarify. I do not perceive what I perceived as Jesus robbing my fun. A lot of people think about, right? It's like, basically you're not allowed to sin as a Christian. Well, you're not allowed to sin as any person. But anyway, it's like you're not allowed to sin as a Christian, so you have to give up all the sins. And all the sins are the things that you want to do. They're all the things that are bad for you, but they're all the things that you enjoy, And so I had this conception that because I wasn't allowed to do those things as a Christian, therefore there would be no fun, because these are the things that I enjoy doing. And the reality of life is, whilst there is an element of truth to that, I'm not going to deny that God, it's not like God said, oh, you can keep doing all of that, Matt. No. There were some things I definitely couldn't keep doing. But in place of that, what you get is so much bigger than what you give up, right? It's like, that's the point. I think that there is a choice where you say, not my will, but your will be done. I will lay these things at your feet. But what he gives you is infinitely more, right? Now, I might not always feel that. I might not always experience that. I might not even always think that's true. But the reality of it is, right? And so what lies before us is greater than what lies behind us. All those sort of type sentences. So I think, what we give is nothing in terms of what we get. And I think, Jesus says in John 10:10, I have come that you may have life and have life in all its abundance. And that Greek word there is Zoe. It means divine life as God has it. I have come that you may have this life to the full, life as God has it, this divine life, this abundant life. That doesn't mean everything you ever wanted in life. It doesn't mean an abundant bank account. It doesn't mean driving around in Ferraris. I mean, maybe for you it does, but for most people it doesn't. But it means life to the life as God has it. And I'm kind of like, that is a goal worth chasing, right? Do I have this life, this abundant life that is full of, and the Bible uses these words over and over again, like joy and peace and contentment and godliness and faith and hope and love. And all of those things, are they growing in me? And if they are, well, that's a remarkable thing, isn't it? And so whatever you give up is nothing in relation to what you get.
I think sometimes we chase after those things because obviously they do look attractive, but it's to kind of fill that hole in us that actually only God can actually fill. And so the things that we chase can be a bit more superficial, but like, you said, when you reorientate to God's way, actually he fulfills those deepest desires that we have. Not necessarily always instantly. Definitely it's been a process for me, and like, definitely some harder times, like working through stuff and digging up all the getting rid of all the dirt out of my life. But yeah,
Worth it though.
definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely worth it.
And I think you're absolutely right that a lot of the time are what we do, that the behaviours that we sometimes cling to that aren't good for us, as sin patterns in our lives. It is just about trying to find those places that God just gives us freely, so that those things like, joy and peace and security and a sense of worth and identity and who am I and all of those things. It's like just finding them in superficial, human, man-made ways that are so much more inferior than what God can give. So it's like, people try to find that in sex and relationships and money or power or alcohol or drugs, whatever you're doing that is quite short term, but actually God's got the real thing, the real deal. It's like sort of inferior. So when we cling to that sin, it strikes me that it's just like the inferior version of what God gives us perfectly. And so the trade-off, actually, once you've tried it, it's not that difficult.
Such a good point
to let go of, because the real deal is so much better than the human inferior version.
Very good point. That is a very good point. Very well said. I'm aware of time.
Yeah, what's ticking on?
Totally not. Oh yeah, it's getting late, isn't it?
So we should
flies
go
when
to
you're
Live
having fun,
Lounge.
doesn't it?
Yeah, we're just cracking on. But we should probably say, sorry, you crack on. I'm not hosting tonight.
I mean, I'm hosting tonight, but I'm not entirely sure what's happening next week. So I might just have to bounce this question back to you.
We talked about
Okay,
it.
we've got the next episode next week, haven't we,
we've
of
got
this series? But tell us who's on.
We've got Dave Connolly speaking to us next week, carrying on in the series. And in theory, we have Will and Mike hosting. So, but you never know.
In theory?
Well, because sometimes it changes, doesn't it?
It does.
yeah.
It does.
It
But
can change.
it can. But I think they'll be okay. But yeah, I'm just pulling up the rota for next week so I can tell you what Dave's going to talk about.
Yeah, and while he's looking for that, and now we're going to finish the live stream any moment, but we're going to carry on in, is it Google Meet?
Yes, it is.
Yes, and hopefully the link will appear in the
feeds.
comments. Yeah,
Great.
So yeah, come and join us.
If Dan's doing his job, the comments, is it in there?
Yeah,
Well done,
so
Dan. Is he
awesome.
doing his job, so?
It's just
Okay.
yeah. So just come and join us for a very informal, just chat, say hi, see how you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be good to see you in there. Next week, Dave is talking about the woman at the well, John chapter 4, the story of the woman at the well, one of the very famous stories in the Gospels. So do come join us for that. Yeah, it's going to be epic.
Awesome. So that's it from us tonight. Come and join us in the in the meet afterwards. And if you don't, get in touch with us in the week, have a look at the Alpha course, drop us a line if you've got any prayer or any questions, any requests. Find all our details on the website. But keep in touch and have a great week.